All right, Laura Surrigs. I don't know how to pronounce that, but asks, what's one belief you used to evangelize that you have evolved on? What catalyzed the shift? That's a great question. I used to think that carbohydrates, in and of themselves, had more of a pronounced impact on health and one's predisposition towards insulin resistance. I don't really believe that anymore. I don't think that carbs are uniquely diabetogenic. Diabetogenic? I always forget that word. Yeah, I don't believe that carbohydrates per se are will uniquely increase your risk for type 2 diabetes, for insulin resistance. I believe now that it's more of a function of essentially energy toxicity. So too much energy coming in. And this is what the science has sort of shifted on as well. I remember there was one line in Genius Foods that if I could go back and rewrite it, Genius Foods is 99%. I mean, it holds up. I mean, I wrote the book to stand the test of time, but I think where I've evolved is in my understanding, and ultimately science has really kind of settled on I think, more concrete understanding of what causes insulin resistance. And the science is always evolving, so science always reserves the right to change. But I think when I was writing Genius Foods, especially prior to a slew of metabolic ward studies performed by Kevin Hall and colleagues out of the NIH, the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity had a little bit more weight in the nutrition sphere. And it was my understanding and the understanding of many others that chronic elevations of insulin, chronic glucose spikes essentially wore out your insulin receptors and would, make you, as a result, tolerant to the effects of insulin, thereby creating the phenomena that we refer to as insulin resistance, which over time leads to chronically high blood sugar, which damages your veins and your brain health, et cetera, et cetera. But now I think the understanding that I have, and it's shared by many in the evidence-based community, and I think, and it makes perfect sense, is that it seems to be the case that when you become over fat, when your fat stores fill to a certain point where they're no longer able to contain all of the energy that you've got coming in, that energy then gets stored in your organs. So whether it's your skeletal muscle or your liver or your pancreas even, this phenomena is known as ectopic fat storage, fat deposition. And it's that sort of overabundance of energy being stored in sites that are not meant to store fat. You get inflammation, and that's where this phenomena of insulin resistance arises from. And that can ultimately happen due to an excess of carbohydrates coming in, an excess of fat coming in. But typically in the context of the standard American diet, it's the influx, it's the ingestion of both carbohydrates and fat. So I don't really put any focus on carbohydrates anymore. I titrate my carbs up to support my performance, and then I bring them down if I want to enjoy more fats in my diet. But I think ultimately it comes down to energy balance, and there have been studies that have shown that all it takes is losing 1 gram of fat from your pancreas to essentially hit the reset button on your insulin sensitivity, provided it hasn't progressed to the point where you require exogenous insulin. So all that is to say, I hope that wasn't too boring, but I don't really put any focus on carbohydrates anymore. I mean, I still try to ingest, I try to prioritize whole food, high quality sources of carbohydrates, of course, but yeah, I think, you want to titrate your carbs up or down to support your performance. You want to titrate your fat intake up or down to support your dietary preferences and also hormone synthesis and the like, digestion, et cetera. But yeah, I'm not so much carb focused as I used to be. I'm not. Calories and nutrient density is the name of the game, and satiety, I guess most importantly. Haley Valine, what is your opinion on saturated fats? Does it matter if it comes from whole foods? So we talked a little bit about that earlier in the show, but I do not believe that saturated fats found in whole food need to be, does one need to be concerned about. The vast majority of saturated fats that your average American ingests comes from actually ultra-processed foods and mixed dishes like burritos and pizzas and things like that. And I think also, saturated fat, the evidence linking it to poor health outcomes is really kind of shoddy science. People who eat the most saturated fat in the context of the standard American diet, what the data shows is that they're eating the most confectionery foods. They're consuming the most mixed dishes. They're eating lots of fast food. They're eating lots of fatty, industrially farmed meat. And along with that, they're more likely to smoke. They're more likely to drink excessive amounts of alcohol. They're more likely to be sedentary. They're more likely to, have adopted other unhealthy lifestyle habits that are going to predispose them to poor health outcomes. So I think that the science on saturated fat is a lot more nuanced than it's often given credence for. And there are different kinds of saturated fatty acids. So I try to focus on food quality. And I don't add a whole bunch of added saturated fats to my diet either. So I'm not one of these big tallow fanboys. I think you can enjoy tallow fries in moderation. But, lots of butter on stuff, lots of tallow, depending on your genes. I mean, you might be an over-responder to having an excessive amount of saturated fat in your diet. But when it comes to whole foods, I'm not really concerned. Whole foods are satiating. They provide a bevy of other important nutrients, like protein. The kinds of foods that would contain saturated fat likely contain protein and other really important micronutrients. So I do not fear saturated fats in any way, shape, or form. I just don't. And again, dairy, the saturated fat in dairy has largely turned out to be a non-issue, with the exception of butter. So if you are prone to high LDL-C, high ApoB, you might want to moderate your butter intake. But other than that, I don't really pay much attention to the saturated fat that I ingest. With the asterisk being that I tend to prioritize lean meat or leaner cuts of meat, and I pay attention to where the meat is coming from, et cetera, et cetera. All right, Heather Beagle, I think that's how you pronounce her last name, asked, did I move to Vegas? It's a great question. I did not move to Vegas, but my family moved to Vegas, so I've been spending a lot more time there. The cost of living is lower. It still is close enough to LA where I get to drive back and forth and see them. But no, I did not move to Vegas. I do spend a lot more time there now, but I don't live there. I still live in Los Angeles. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.